Alrighty. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ETC Discord and to a community call being held today live to have a discussion about the IOHK Treasury Proposal. The schedule that we have, you can check it out at the community discussion channel, Treasury-call-2020-813, and the voice channel is the one that you're currently in right now. So now, before we get started, since this call is scheduled as an initial proposal to be included in the ECIP process after getting community feedback, we need to first, get a role check of the client team. So we'll start off with CoreGet. Anyone here representing CoreGet team, speak up.
Hello.
Hey, Isaac. So for the Besu team is ChainSafe and the ETC Co-op. I'll be speaking on behalf of the ETC Co-op, and you also have Classic Kevin and Bob Samuel to represent Besu. For IOHK, we got Charles Hoskinson. Charles, are you here?
Yep.
All right, cool. So now, just to give you guys an introduction, so over the last week, we had two 51% attacks on ETC that really harmed the ecosystem and community. Obviously, we have a lot of proposals for this, which are going to be held on a call next week, on Thursday, August 20, 2020. So if you have any proposal for proof of work or anything to fix 51% attack and what you think is like the right solution, we encourage you to join the call next week. It will be held by Apri, our hardcore coordinator. So, but for this call is focused on the Treasury and only the Treasury. So in the aftermath of the attacks, to give you a backstory, Charles Hoskinson, CEO of IOHK, has come up with a bold proposal for ETC to include a Treasury that can really fund ecosystem level development, and that includes, most importantly, core level development. That kind of vision will allow ETC to be a long-term sustainable platform and be able to build value through innovation. And through building of value, you can also protect the chain. The Treasury idea has existed in ETC for so long, and I've always been a big fan of the proposal. In fact, it was actually one of my original reasons for joining ETC a long time ago. So here, what we're going to do is we have IOHK and Charles to go over the proposal. He has about, I think, 4 engineers from IOHK that can go over the technical discussion of the proposal. So what we're going to do for the, for the agenda, we're going to give them the stage for 20 minutes to pitch it before we go to Q&A and gather feedback. So we also want to remind you guys that this is first and foremost a technical discussion, and your feedback is important to the idea. We asked you in IOHK's pitch to give them the stage to explain the idea, and you will have a chance, to ask questions later. If you cannot follow those rules, we will have to mute you. So let's get started. So Charles, the stage is all yours if you want to, start with the proposal. And then around, okay. I think around the 25-minute mark or maybe before, we can, maybe we'll start building questions, take it to Q&A.
Okay, and just let me know when I'm getting close, because I have a legacy of not necessarily being the most concise person, so I do apologize ahead of time.
No problem.
It's good to be on Discord. I haven't used Discord since the EVE Online days, so this is a blast from the past, and it's amazing to see how far this platform has evolved in the years. Thank you all for coming, especially on short notice. We're here today as a direct response to a surface problem, but oftentimes with surface problems, it's an indication of a deeper problem. And the surface problem is the 51% attacks. And there are certainly many resolutions that we could pursue there. For example, our company wrote a paper on securing proof-of-work blockchains using checkpoints. And we actually tested this solution, and we have it in production on an Ethereum Classic client. Brian McKenna is the product manager there. And you guys might remember Alan McSherry. He was the product manager for Mantis back in the day. So that's certainly a problem, and it's certainly resolvable. But the root cause of that problem is adoption. You see, all proof-of-work systems rely on being valuable. And if they're not valuable, you just don't get enough mining participation to have a reasonable level of security with the chain. That's just a fundamental truth, and Bitcoin is no different from ETC in this respect. If Bitcoin lived in the same environment we live in with the same market cap, there's a very high probability it would be suffering from persistent 51% attacks here and there whenever it suited an attacker, and they'd be sporadic just like they are here. So it's my belief that the only way to settle this problem is for the community to get to a point where the chain has a lot of use and utility, adoption, promise, and a much higher market cap. Then you'll have a lot of mining competition. And as a consequence, the chain will be secure enough that people believe that 51% attacks just aren't going to occur. They'll simply be too expensive to occur. That's the core thesis behind the proposal that I made about a treasury. You see, you give ecosystems a time to find their identity and find their management structure and their leadership, and ETC's been around for a long time. Depending on who you ask, if you ask a guy like me, it's been around since I founded it with Vitalik and Gavin back in 2013. You ask the Ethereum community, perhaps they say it was around since the DAO fork, but regardless, there's a lot of years there on both categories. Okay, so what does this mean? It means that the entire cryptocurrency space has had an opportunity to judge ETC and make decisions about where should they deploy their tokens, where should they deploy their dapps, who should they bet on. And every year, year by year by year by year, we keep seeing more and more competition from better teams. When I entered the cryptocurrency space, we were talking about the Litecoins and the name coins, and we were talking about Purecoin and these types of things. And they were small projects, and in some cases run by anonymous people. And now we have projects like Algorand, led by Sylvia Macaulay, who has a Turing Award, the Nobel Prize of Computer Science, and huge amounts of VC funding behind him, and a lot of really good people that he's managed to poach from IBM Research and poach from MIT and so forth. And that's just one of hundreds of options that people have that are built on great protocols, validated by peer-reviewed science, and that come from 10 years of hindsight that we've gained from having Bitcoin around. And so as a consequence, if you put yourself and have some empathy for the developer, for the person who's in the market for a platform, you have to ask, why would they choose Ethereum Classic over Algorand, Tezos, or any other? Especially when some of these platforms literally have hundreds of millions to billions of dollars, depending on the ones that you look at, ready to go to incentivize developers to do things there. And then you ask, well, what's the vision of ETC? Where is it going? Perhaps we can inspire them with the fact that we're going somewhere special. We have some technology that's coming. And there's certainly a lot of great technology in the space. Absolutely amazing technology. It's been 10 years. People have been thinking about proof of work for a while. There's protocols like Prism from Pramod Viswani, for example, tested on Bitcoin 10,000 times faster as a proof of work algorithm. We created something called MegaPows, which would give you great light clients in really efficient side chains that require very concise proofs. And there's other teams building competing protocols like FlyClient, for example. There's recursive snarks. Okay, so the totality of the scientific community's woken up, and every year they publish dozens, if not hundreds, of papers that are useful, and if they were pulled into a cohesive vision, would allow ETC to have a very divergent path, a unique path from Ethereum, and become something truly special that provides use and utility that's different from anyone else in the space. And so then you ask yourself as a developer, you ask yourself as a token issuer, would you want to choose something like that? If you believe they can execute that roadmap and you believe that that technology worked, a lot of people would take that bet, at least enough to actually push the token price up, to actually push the ecosystem up. And at the end of the day, miners, they are service providers. And they don't mine because they love an ecosystem. More often than not, they mine because it's a business. And they don't care if they get 10 tokens or 8 tokens. That's not what they're asking. Usually they say, can I sell these tokens for a profit based upon my cost? So more use and adoption, higher token price. We get to a point where miners will mine. So more hash rate. And that's the ultimate solution to the 51% problem. Now, people have to believe we can execute that roadmap. We tried it, the completely decentralized volunteerism donation model, for years. We did. I said, we tried the Treasury proposal in 2017, and there wasn't enough support. ETC Dev was there, other people were there, and I said, just let the ecosystem do its thing then. Let's see what the voluntarism donation model can do. And after all these years, ETC's been stalled. Let's be intellectually honest about that. Let's take a step back and ask, where's the adoption? Where are the dapps? Where are the tokens? Where's the belief that the best days are ahead of us? How are we going to make the case for the $44 billion worth of miners that Ethereum is firing when they move from ETH1 to ETH2 to come over to Ethereum Classic? Why would they come here? What are we offering? It hasn't happened, and it principally hasn't happened because there aren't well-funded independent development teams that are capable of exercising a long-arc roadmap with some certainty behind them. And there's not going to be an ICO. It shouldn't happen. So the only other option for that is for a wealthy benefactor to show up and out of the beneficence and grace of his or her heart, basically pay a bunch of people. And that's kind of sort of happened. But usually you end up descending to the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. Or for the community to open its pocket and say, look, we're all paying a tax. At the end of the day, this is not the miners' money. You pay the miners for security, and you pay them at the time they perform the service, and they make a decision whether what you're paying is enough for them to show up. This is the community's money. Each and every person who holds Ether is taxed by inflation. And right now, all of you who hold Ether Classic are paying 100% of that tax to one group. And yes, this group does occasionally provide value and occasionally burn the house down and damage the brand and credibility of the product, such that it's been pushed to this crisis. But there are so many other good people waking up every single day. And those people are doing great work, and they get nothing. And they're being told, well, if you want a profit, go buy the token, and your work will be reflected in the appreciation of the token. I guess this is a communist argument, because guess what? You can work incredibly hard. You can wake up every day, 20 hours a day, barely sleep, kill yourself, and your profit will be identical to the person who did nothing. You split the rewards with them. That's not fair. That's not reasonable. And you know what? You get what you pay for. And we've seen it all the time in the open source community. We have 30 plus years of history there, from the GNU PG project to dozens of other open source projects where tireless founders, underpaid, not paid at all, are holding up critical pieces of infrastructure of the web. And occasionally they get it wrong. And you have Heartbleed with OpenSSL and dozens of other critical problems that come from the fact that there's not funding for those teams. And then what we do is big companies come in like Microsoft and Facebook and Google, and they use the fact that they have unlimited money to subsidize these projects, and they push these projects towards centralizing the web, centralizing infrastructure towards their competitive and business domains. We saw it when Oracle bought Sun. Look what it did to Java. Look what it did to the SQL world. And we've seen it dozens of times with Microsoft. We've seen it dozens of times with Google and Facebook. So it's unrealistic to assume that we're going to be any different. Now, in terms of an actual proposal, it actually doesn't have to be that complicated to begin with. You start with the foundations, and we already have a great legacy from Zcash to see there, and yes, they do some phenomenal work. So here's my proposal. We start simple. We adjust when we hard fork to take some of the block rewards and pay a smart contract. And that smart contract will have 3 entities that are capable of withdrawing from it equal terms. Basically, the entities that are maintaining core infrastructure, so the actual full nodes. They earned it. They've put in huge amounts of work throughout the years. They're known brands and entities in the ecosystem, and we hold them accountable to basic reporting. Every week, they show what they've done. We meet regularly on a monthly basis. Alan did this years ago. If you go to the IOHK YouTube channel, you can see week by week, he and Alan Verbner and the rest of the team showing off what they did for Mantis. And I believe all the other teams are already doing that or can do that. Very simple. And then you give the community the power to shut that contract off and return that inflation to the miners if they deem it necessary, to add members and to remove members. Easy smart contract to implement, and we can build in some modularity to it. We can build in some upgradability to it. And let's call that the proto-treasury. The point of this is it's a symbol to the entire cryptocurrency industry that ETC is here to play, and it wants to have 3 independent, fully funded teams that are capable of carrying and exercising a strong roadmap. We use this to stabilize the clients, get them past the 51% point, and Then we bring those core teams together. We come up with a really competitive, beautiful roadmap for 2021. We have some ideas that we think could make ETC 100 times faster than it is right now. New data structures, a better proof of work protocol, and we can propose both proof of work and proof of stake hybrids. We can propose all kinds of things through the ECIP process. And our counterparties will be two well-funded independent teams that know that their opinion is not controlled or beholden to some rich benefactor. Rather, they work directly for the ecosystem. Now, this proto-treasury is a temporary thing, and the community at any time can shut it off if a supermajority show up and basically do that. It's a smart contract, pretty easy to interact. We can even put the tools to shut that off or modify it right into each client. And instead, what we do is we replace it with a much more open system. And yet we're building that system right now as an example with Cardano. We have this beautiful framework called Voltaire, and we're just starting to turn it on. We spent over $10 million developing it over a 3-year period. Lots of beautiful protocols that came out of Lancaster University. We have a lot of partners like Submittable and IdeaScale, which is an innovation management firm that we're working with. And we'll propose that through the ECIP process. But here's the point. There's two other extremely well-funded, completely independent clients that exist. And guess what they're doing? They're checking it. They're proposing counter-arguments. They're saying, perhaps we should do it differently. And if we can't reach a consensus, the community at any time can say, well, the Treasury experiment failed, and just simply shut the contract off. And the control for that is built right into the client. But here's what's going to happen. The existence of this thing is going to open up a renaissance, because the conversation each and every person who has Ether Classic has now is, what should I vote on? What should be the priorities of the ecosystem? What roadmap should we follow? How do we get dapps in here? And there's funding available for them. So instead of when is the price of Ether going to go up? When are people going to come and save us? Why is this entity not doing its job? Every single person has a voice. Every single person has a vote. Every single person has the ability to influence the ecosystem in some way. Maybe a small way, maybe a large way, instead of just developers and miners. And the people who are responsible for holding up the ecosystem, they know their jobs are secure, and they're incentivized to make the chain more valuable. They're incentivized to add more capabilities to the chain because the ether that they're receiving will become more valuable. It's just that simple. It's human nature. The other thing is Vitalik is incredibly against this idea. And we ask ourselves, how do we come up with our own identity? He hasn't ever gone to the Cardano Reddit. I don't think I've ever seen him there. The first time he's ever posted anything on the Cardano Reddit was the same day that ETC Labs apparently posted their Medium article opposing the Treasury system. So I'm a little surprised that those both happened on the same day. But he came to mention that the Treasury was a bad idea. So here's what that means. It means Ethereum is not going to pursue this path. So if we go down this road, we're unique and different, and we're offering dapp developers something different than what ETH2 is offering them. And we're not just making arguments on performance. We're not just making arguments on security or immutability. We're also saying that there's a different way of getting funded than an ICO. There's a different way of getting funded than a benefactor or a venture capital firm that's going to require you to build in some centralization so you can profit as the middleman like Uber does or Airbnb does. You can actually get paid directly from the ecosystem to build something that benefits the entire ecosystem. So what does it mean? It means people who believe in that philosophy won't deploy on Ethereum. They'll come to Ethereum Classic. And we can make the case as those miners leave to come to us to mine on our chain, and as the developers decide that Ethereum is not for them, to come to us. That's my belief. Now, I understand a lot of people disagree with me, and that's fair. And we can all disagree without being disagreeable. But you have to be intellectually honest with yourself, and you have to look to the future and say, where is this all going to be, and who's going to pay for it? And do you trust the people who currently have the money to pay for it to get you there? The power structure right now is exactly the same. And they've been around for a while. They've had Treasury for a while. They've had their own money for a while. And they funded things for a while. Where's the vision? Where's the roadmap? Where is this going to go? I'm happy to come in and provide something with other people. but I've spent already $1.5 million of my own money. That's not trivial. That's more than most people will see in a lifetime, completely uncompensated. And when I asked the old power structure, the one that you still have today, can I get some funding to just maintain the Mantis client at cost? I was told, sorry, maybe we'll give you a partial subsidy, but that's it. And then you ask yourself, if this is how we treat the people who were here since the very beginning, who have already invested 7 figures of their money, effort, and time into doing something in an open, transparent way that's open source and anyone can use, what are we going to do for the dapp developers, and what are we going to do for the token issuers that are going to come into this ecosystem? How are we going to treat them? What subsidies are available for them? What incentives are available for them? And if our argument is we don't need to even think about it, if we build it, they will come, then I ask you, why don't they just build on Bitcoin? It's getting more capable. And yes, it already has a path for Ethereum-style smart contracts. And if people just care about decentralization and immutability, they start at the OG, and they start at the top, and they start at the ecosystem that never once has wavered in any respect and has no custodians. So it's not a good enough argument. And the competitive pressures will continue to batter and diminish this ecosystem to the point where it doesn't die, but it lingers on for year after year like NXT does and Peercoin does. And these other projects that I remember from the past were very promising. In fact, with NXT, I was worried about it when I was at Ethereum the first time around. I said, boy, if these guys could get organized, they could be a real competition. And it just never happened. Okay? So very concise proposal. What we'll do is write 2 ECIPs. The first one is for the community, and that's a solution for the 51% attack via checkpointing. And we can demo that with the client we've already constructed and stage a fake 51% attack on it and show how the system recovers. And if any of the core developers from the other clients want to implement that, we will be available for technical questions. We'll do this as a service to the community, regardless of whether a treasury is on the table or not, because I would like to see at least the ecosystem get past these events and do it with a bit of rigor, not a knee-jerk reaction to some platform somewhere. We wrote this paper with 2 great scientists, Agalos Kaiasis and Dimitris. They're both at the University of Edinburgh, and they did it right, and we've implemented and heavily tested it. The other ECIP we'll write is for this simple treasury mechanism, where we divert some inflation to a treasury contract. We put some simplistic governance tools into it to cut it off and return it to the miners, to add more members, to remove members with a supermajority of Ether holders. And we say the 3 initial clients should be the 3 ones that draw from it for the first few months. And we'll put that all down in the ECIP. This will get us past a hard fork, and this will set us up to propose a great roadmap for 2021.
I just want to interject. In 2 minutes, we want to take it as well to QA just to keep it on time.
Yeah, I'm just wrapping up.
Oh, thank you.
So in 2021, we can sit, 3 independent, well-funded teams can come together. We could put a beautiful roadmap on the table. Because we're compensated, we'll have the ability to talk to some of the best scientists in the space, some of the best engineers in the space, and really, really pay attention and get deep into this and propose, as I mentioned, technology that's 100 times faster and a heck of a lot better and completely different from the technology of Ethereum, but at the same time interoperable as the EVM and so forth. So it's easy to get Solidity developers. And then we can go and get to the business of making the case for adoption, get the token price up, and then the 51% attacks go away permanently. And we can compete and be our own ecosystem. If it turns out the treasury experiment is a failure, the community will do the thing and shut it off, because they at any time can do that. And then the next hard fork on the schedule, they can just remove that mechanic altogether, and we can say at least we tried. We tried to do something unique and new. So that concisely is my proposal. That's where I'm coming from. I understand, again, if you guys disagree, that's okay. Let's just try not to be disagreeable, and I really hope that we find a way forward, because too many good people have put too much work into this project throughout the years, and it would be a tragedy for Ethereum Classic to fail or just to persist as a zombie chain. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Charles, for the overview and for the proposal. So now we're going to take it to Q&A. So for everyone here, during Q&A, your feedback is very important. We just ask you to remain on topic. because we have a limited time and we want everyone to be able to ask any questions or give any feedback. If you agree with the proposal, that's a great opinion. You can express it, but you can also explain why you like the proposal. And if you disagree with the proposal as well, that's also a valid opinion. We ask you to express why, but we just want to maintain things on topic. So yeah, let's take it to Q&A.
Charles, I've got a question for you. In thinking about the design of the Treasury, I think you first said that there would be 3 addresses, and I think we've talked about that, like ETC Co-op, ETCLand, and then they would all get to withdraw from the proto smart contract that would be funded by some share of the mining rewards.
Right.
And then is the expectation then that contract, that proto contract, would be amended or superseded by a contract that would allow the community members to submit proposals like the white paper from 2017 has?
Yeah, exactly. The problem is that a treasury system is a very complicated piece of software, and it's just simply too much to do in a short period of time. So what you need to do is get yourself independent, well-funded infrastructure providers who actually have the ability to deeply think about things, and then build a proper treasury system through the ECIP process with the luxury of time in a systematic approach. We've spent, as I've mentioned, over 3 years building the Voltaire system, and it does exactly this. It allows people to submit ballots. It allows people to vote on it. We have different voting systems like preferential voting and threshold voting. We're considering adding quadratic voting. We have an innovation management step in the ballot design, and we even have delegative democracy, where you can give your vote to other people. Now, we're building that as a side chain to Cardano, so that same infrastructure could conceivably actually be reused for Ethereum Classic. And then the smart contract can just be an oracle, a contract that receives an oracle and does the distribution of funds, but the actual voting can happen off-chain. So there's a lot of ways you can implement a treasury, and my point is keep it simple. We already have great evidence with Zcash that's produced a lot of innovation, and it's managed to keep a great company around. So let's go do that. And then once we have that infrastructure in place, let's use that to bootstrap a much more open and egalitarian treasury. But you have to ask, well, what's the incentive for those actors to behave? Well, at any time, if the community loses faith in them, they can replace them, or they can shut the treasury system down altogether. And we can build those tools right into the clients very easily, because it can just be an interface to a smart contract. So I'm in love with simplicity. I know we kind of got a reputation on the Cardano side with complexity, and we kind of overdid it on some of the things that we did, especially the formal method stuff. But at the end of the day, if for something like this, you have to learn how to crawl before you can run. So build something simple and then come back to it in a few months once you have the right people in the room. And then through an open community-driven process, gradually build up an egalitarian treasury. And before the end of 2021, we can have one in place. And there's going to be all kinds of options. There's the Tezos style. There's the Dash style. There was the original ETC proposal we put in 2017. There's the Voltaire system for Cardano. There's Decred. There's hundreds of projects out there that are talking about this. And it gives us a chance to talk to those projects directly about their experience.
There are some questions in the chat channel if you guys want to take a look.
Yeah, so I have a question from Chris Hitchcott. He says, Charles, you mentioned that a supermajority of ETC would be able to vote to shut it off, as in the Treasury. Do we even know that 70% plus of ETC is still active, like cold wallets and stuff? Also, the second question, how do you ensure that the simple phase 1 move to phase 2, as there is a financial disincentive for the 3 core teams to do this?
Okay, so the first question is a very valid one, because it's not clear how much stake is actually still live. And so one way of resolving that is through a registration process. So what you do is you use a special transaction to lock your funds for a period of time, and then you consider that registered active stake, and then you say if a supermajority of that registered active stake votes in a way, then that's the supermajority. This is what we're doing in Cardano, and those capabilities are being put into our ledger in October, and we'll get real live data about levels of participation. if you have a random sample of an entire community, even if you have 10 or 20% of the state vote, then by polling theory, that's probably a representative sample of the opinion of the entire whole within some sort of margin of error. This is a well-studied thing in politics. So this is something the ECIP process would have to sort out and get people comfortable. So we'd be happy to write an ECIP, as I mentioned, about the strawman smart contract, and then a debate through GitHub would kind of drill down what do we mean by supermajority, and do we want to put a registration phase in to make it a bit more explicit, because that would guarantee that those tokens are live and they're participating. And then the second question is about incentives. This is why you have checks and balances. So you have two sets of checks and balances. One is that the developers keep each other in check, and that's usually on the roadmap. And then two, the community keeps developers in check. They say, are you doing a good job with our money? So the first question they're going to ask is, are you being transparent? Are you regularly communicating with us about your priorities and your progress? So when we were building Mantis, for example, Alan worked very hard at trying to show people every single week what we had done. Regardless if we had done a lot or a little, we were very religious about those updates to the community. And I think there needs to be that for anyone receiving funds. Second, if the community loses faith, for example, they think they're dragging their feet too much, they can remove an entity through that same voting mechanism, or they can just say the experiment has failed, let's shut it off. Now, this is an advantage we have over a system like Zcash, for example, where that really can't be done. It's actually quite easy for us to do that once we have those voting mechanics in place, and they're not super sophisticated. They can be built carefully, and we would certainly have that smart contract audited by QuantStamp and other actors to make sure that it was correctly built. But I think that's the best way to start, and, we can easily reach social consensus on the replacement of the system, and it's in everyone's best interest to do so, because at the end of the day, what are we trying to do? Get stable infrastructure, a stable roadmap, and then be in a really good position to subsidize dapps and tokens to come to Ether Classic. And by having a treasury system in place that allows them to do that, it's going to appreciate the token price. It's going to bring more adoption into the space. So it's better for everybody. So there's an economic incentive in a certain respect for the developers, because they hold Ether, and it's in their best interest for that Ether they hold to go up. And it's not going to if they try to preserve the treasury structure and the proto style, because they won't get the adoption necessary to do that.
Thank you, Charles. There's another question on chat by Carlos M. Who are the 314 that will be funded, and how are they decided?
So I think the most egalitarian, meritocratic way of doing that is the people who are maintaining the core clients. So there are three. Mantis we can bring back into the ecosystem within 3 months, and that's when we do the hard fork anyway. So if you're a core developer, you have a proven track record, you understand the technology at a very deep level, and you've shown that you've spent your own money to build a team. In all cases, all three clients have spent well over $1 million of their own funding to do that. I think they've earned the social credit required to be part of that initial experiment. Now, the whole point is to replace this proto-treasury with a more open treasury, and then what will happen is those three core entities will continue making the case to the community, hopefully, that they'd like to keep developing by submitting ballots, but then other actors will show up and submit ballots as well. And then this opens up a community-wide discussion about priorities. Where should we spend our money? Do we want yet another client and have a fourth client? Or perhaps we want some layer 2 infrastructure? Maybe we want to port some things that are only living in the Ethereum world or other worlds into the system. Maybe we want better exchange infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. But you see, that conversation starts, and then eventually the community will decide where the funding priorities need to lie. And maybe we only need 2 clients instead of 3, or maybe we need 4, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you, Charles. Another question by, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, ExoCell. So he asks, given ETC's plan to state proof of work, why does this proposal have such an anti-miner tone, especially given recent events imposing a tax? Go for it.
I don't think this is anti-miner at all, because again, I see people say bizarre statements like you're stealing from the miners or you're taking money from the miners. Guys, would you rather have 10 Bitcoin or 20 Litecoin? The amount of tokens that you mine per block has nothing to do with whether you're going to mine that block or not. What matters is the price of those tokens. If they're very valuable, it doesn't matter if it's one or two, it's still worth your time to show up and do that. They're service providers, and they're going to show up and they're going to leave based upon whether they think they can profit from this. And this is an ephemeral activity. People come and go. Every 4 years, Bitcoin cuts their miner wages by a factor of 2. And every 4 years, we see the hash rate dip a little bit and new people enter in and it goes back up. So the point here is what is best to make ETC a valuable ecosystem that is vibrant and has lots of use and utility, and as a consequence, the token price is high because that will incentivize miners to come. And they will make a decision based upon ROI, whether to mine or not based upon the absolute amount of tokens that are there. And I guarantee you miners would much rather mine 8 tokens at $50 than 10 tokens at $10. Makes a lot more sense to them. And we have proof of that with the way the hash rate is distributed. Who right now is the most valuable token and who right now has the most hash rate? See, so this is what miners do.
Thank you, Charles. So another question, let's see. Another question by the same user, XOCell, who's saying this is likely going to be a contentious fork. Why should miners support the Treasury chain instead of keeping the existing chain alive in which there are not taps?
Because the existing chain has years of track record and it hasn't done much. And it doesn't really look like it's going to appreciate rapidly in 2021. Whereas a Treasury chain with 3 powerful, independently funded development teams with an incentive to innovate and a highly engaged community has a much better chance of being competitive in 2021 and having value appreciation. So the tokens they mine on this chain will be far more valuable than the tokens that they mine on the old chain that is stagnant. Also, if a substantial amount of the core developers and community management and leaders move over to the new chain, then the old chain is even weaker. So as a consequence, it's a less attractive target to mine. So yes, you'll get less tokens overall with new chain versus old chain. Those tokens in new chain will be worth more than the old chain tokens. So a miner as a business will make a decision accordingly.
Thank you, Charles. Is there anyone from the voice channel who has a question?
Hey, this is Alex here. I would just like to add that as someone who is like a developer on the ETC ecosystem, has worked with dapps on there for years, maintaining Commonwealth, dapp Direct, all that stuff. I'm personally really supportive of the Treasury idea because I run these nodes every day. And if the Treasury can mean that it's a higher quality node experience and it's easier for me to, run my dapp, which has its own business plan associated with it, I think that's great. The only thing that I would add as well is that I would like there to be an ability to have as a fourth entity, being able to send to a burn address. Because if the community loses faith in the three core entities that would be receiving the Treasury funds, it would be nice for them to just be able to opt out and send to the burn address, which would allow them to sort of veto the process. And if there's, let's say, a bug in the contract, that would be really useful. That was the one thing I wanted to add there.
Yeah, we could definitely explore a burn mechanic. And I assume you're saying a burn on the miner side. So instead of when they mine the block, it goes to the Treasury, it goes to a burn address as like
exactly. It's kind of like an opt-out flag. If by default they would mine to the Treasury, but if they were to run the software with a flag, then their Treasury reward would just be burnt instead. And that would be their way of saying that we don't believe in the Treasury, for example, for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, so that's actually giving a vote to the miner as opposed to the community. That's actually a really interesting. We could add that into the ECIP. That's not a problem.
And it would just be the burn address. And I think that to me, as someone who's a big ecosystem participant, that's enough of a balance, I feel like, in the power that I would feel comfortable with that.
Anybody else from the voice channel?
Charles, me again. I've got a question. I read as I said before, I read the 2017 white paper, and the question is, is something like this white paper, very, very nearly this white paper, the target for maybe what we would call like proto Treasury contract V2, where V1 would just have a simple whitelist for 3 withdrawable addresses?
Yeah, that's a great question too. Our thinking has evolved quite a bit because, we've done millions of dollars worth of research and spent years since we wrote that paper on evolving things. And so we now have the Voltaire framework, and I can send you a lot of, there's like hours and hours and hours of video presentations and papers and so forth. But right now we're turning that treasury system on with Cardano, and we're measuring key metrics like the quality of ballots, the level of voting participation, how many ballots are submitted versus how many ballots are accepted, who's getting ballots accepted. And those first funds are starting this year. Fund 1 is a focus group, but Fund 2 is turning on in October. And every 6 to 8 weeks, we're running a fund. If we were to propose an upgrade to the proto-treasury, we would probably propose it in that direction because we think it balances things out really nicely and it adds a lot more voting tools in the tool bag, like preference voting and quadratic voting and threshold voting and so forth. So you can, and also it allows to delegate. So you can delegate your vote to community experts. So this is an interesting power dynamic. There's a whole thing called liquid feedback or liquid democracy. So certain people in the community who don't necessarily hold a lot of ether can end up actually controlling a lot of voice, like maybe a prominent dapp developer or an expert or something, because people trust their opinion. We call those like the Andreas Antonopouloses or something. So I would not advocate for the existing treasury paper that we wrote in 2017. Rather, what we would do is update it to reflect what we learned from Voltaire and then submit it through the ECIP process to the community. Now, the advantage of having 2 independently funded teams outside of our own is that there's pushback. They're going to read that, have their own opinion, their own view on how things ought to be done, and then anybody else can participate. We have the funding necessary to even bring in outside parties and look at other systems. Like one thing I'd be favorable to is to pay PwC or another consultancy to do a report on all the treasury systems in the cryptocurrency space and what they perceive to be the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then through a process of cooperation, collaboration, compromise, and creative destruction, eventually would converge to something that is everybody can live with. But in terms of design principles, I would like it to be as egalitarian, fair, and open as possible. So basically anyone can submit a ballot, anyone could conceivably receive funding, and there has to be the right foundations for people to have a proper conversation. This is why we partnered with IdeaScale, an innovation management company, because their whole job is to take a raw proposal and turn it to something that's actionable, auditable, and meaningful. So similarly, it's nice to have that type of infrastructure in your treasury system. So not only can people submit ballots, they actually have people who will show up to help them take it to the next level and refine that raw idea into a better idea so that can actually get funded and implemented. That's the direction we'd like to go.
I would.
Sorry, I'd just like to remind everyone, we got maybe like 15 minutes. So yeah, if anyone had any more questions, just wanted to add that first.
Cool. Oh, I also just wanted to commit and actually volunteer to create one of these treasury contracts in Solidity code. I feel like I can create a very basic 3-party contract that has the 3 parties we've talked about, and 2 out of 3 can vote on a proposal. And I think I can make that in about 100 or so lines of Solidity code, very simple. And that could be a good initial implementation. I can make that, and it's probably a few months to show to the community.
Yeah, Mantis will be ready by November with the existing team. They're going to push real hard on that. There may be a few weeks slippage, but we're going to work real hard to get that. So that means as soon as we could participate in a hard fork to enable this would be the November timeframe. So there's plenty of time to actually talk about a contract and talk about the mechanics behind it. From our end, we'll write an ECIP and corresponding reference Solidity code to it. But then it'd be nice to see other people write their own Solidity contracts and try to blend these things together till we get to one that we're really comfortable with and we think balances things out. For example, I didn't think about the minor burn option, but that's actually an excellent idea because it allows a different kind of voting in the system for vote of no confidence. And it would be really cool if maybe there was a Slack fund, so we have kind of a 4th unallocated pool for community projects, and ballots could be submitted that way, and the entities could vote on it, like what you're talking about. So there's a lot of innovation we can certainly have, and this is the beauty of crowdsourcing it. So my whole goal is just get the ECIP up, start talking around it, and let people write contracts, and then we can converge on something everybody can live with.
Yeah, so I have another question. This one from Terry Culver, CEO of ETCLand, who released a statement yesterday against the Treasury. He's asking, Charles, can you give an honest assessment why the Treasury proposal was rejected last time it was proposed?
The last time, because people wanted to run the experiment of decentralized funding and volunteerism. And I think that's fair. Bitcoin was successful with that setup. And there was good arguments to make that ETC didn't need custodians. And remember, ETC was fresh off the back of a custodian, the Ethereum Foundation. So we ran the experiment, and ETC as an ecosystem was left to its own devices in a completely decentralized way. And had it been successful, we would have seen a lot more adoption, a lot more progress. But instead, it stalled out a little bit. Meanwhile, the entire space moved on, and a lot of coins like Tezos and Dash and Decred have moved into the Treasury spectrum, and they've added a huge amount of depth and maturity into the conversation that wasn't there in 2017. And there's a lot more theory that's now available for people to work with. So I think it was just a little ahead of its time, and the community wanted to try something else as an experiment. And now that experiment has failed, because we're not where we need to be, we have to reevaluate and ask ourselves as a community, where do we want to go? Do we want more of the same, or do we want to try something new? My proposal is let's make a symbol. Let's build something, try it out for 6 months. Let's see where it takes us. If it doesn't work, both the miners and the Ether holders have the ability to stop the experiment. And you know what? We move on. We try something else. It doesn't violate the principles of immutability of the system. And at the end of the day, we have to understand that every single Ether holder is taxed. That's something we can never forget. You all pay an inflation tax. And right now, 100% of that inflation is only going to one actor in the ecosystem, the miners, who sometimes are with us, and as we've seen lately, sometimes they're not with us. So we need now to reevaluate how we are using our inflation tax, and maybe it's better to try something else. You have to be willing to take a risk to be successful. And you have to be willing to reward people who work really hard to make you successful. And I have just seen over the years too many really good people in the Ethereum Classic ecosystem, from Stuart McKenzie to dozens on down, who have come and they've gone, and they've left out of frustration, where they wanted to do something, but they could never get the traction, the money, and the resources they needed to take it to the next level. And had those people been brought in, embraced, and had the ability to grow, ETC would be in a very different place. Ethereum had an unfair advantage. All those people who wanted to do cool stuff, like the chain links and so forth, they did their ICOs. That's how they funded everything. Our ecosystem was much more principled. We didn't succumb to ICO mania. But that meant that all the people who would be here to support the infrastructure and build things were chronically underfunded, and as a consequence had to go somewhere else. So, I think it was just before its time to answer Terry's question, and we ran it their way for years. And my question to everybody in the ecosystem is, are you happy with where we're at and the outcome of that experiment? And do you want to change? And I'm proposing a change, and I think together we can get there.
Thank you, Charles. I think, Liz, you wanted to ask a question. I'm not sure if you wanted to ask a question, Liz. Okay. Let me look at some of the questions. A question by the user Joe Stack. How is the ETC Treasury Proposal different than Decred's current Treasury system?
This is a proto-proposal, and my goal is to keep it as simple as possible so everybody can understand it. I think whenever you have a system that's too complicated, then it ends up just falling apart. So this is just a three-way split with some governance mechanics to keep those people receiving it in check. And then the point of the system is to bootstrap a much more sophisticated system. And as I mentioned, it's a marketplace of ideas. So we could certainly go into the Decred realm. We can go into the Tezos realm. We can go into the Cardano realm with Voltaire. But the exciting thing is you're going to have three well-resourced entities, independent from each other, that are capable of curating that and holding each other in checks and balances. And then what will end up happening is we'll converge to a compromise that is unique. So it won't be like Decred and it won't be like Cardano, but it'll be unique to the needs of ETC. And everybody can live with, and we can very easily implement it. And if we can't reach a compromise, then we'll just shut it off. And we'll say, well, oh well, but at least we get to say we tried, and go do something different.
Thank you, Charles. Let me see. I'm seeing from the Q&A board, how does adding another client, Mantis, solve any of our current issues? Does it not introduce issues like we face with the chain split?
No, I don't think adding another client, if the client is compliant with the other clients, then we've already validated it was a few years back. I mean, Alan worked rigorously to do that. So I don't think it's going to create a split in that respect. And again, solving the 51% attacks of today is fairly straightforward. You can use an external service, or we can implement a checkpointing system, and there you go, it's done. But the problem is that that's exogenous consensus you're taking from outside of the resources of the system. The real resolution has to come from making the chain valuable enough that it's too expensive to do a 51% attack. You can innovate on the proof of work side to make your proof of work algorithm a bit more resilient to these types of things. And you can think carefully about what is the nature of your consensus algorithm, and are you GPU or ASIC friendly? And this is certainly a great debate, but whether we have one client or three clients, that's not the point. The point is that you want independent development teams to keep each other in check and balance, so that you don't develop a monoculture around one set of ideas and one set of approaches. Because even if you disagree, because they control all the clients and they control all the funding and they control all the developers, they basically get to railroad through whatever agenda they want. By having three, you have enough diversity there that all three of these people in the marketplace of ideas can have checks and balances with each other.
Thank you, Charles. So just to inform everyone, we have 8 minutes more for the call being scheduled. So originally, the idea of this call was just to get feedback from the community to see if there's some level of interest, at least to propose an ECIP as a draft, which is what we were hoping to achieve with this call. So after the 8-minute mark, if it goes to overtime, it depends on whoever is comfortable, staying longer and answering questions. I can't promise you guys anything. Right. So a question by Fyro. Voting would be weighted by your state, correct? We have some accounts that have a lot of ETC and could hence themselves be the supermajority. Is that correct?
Yeah, you could do a stake-weighted voting system. If you want to diverge from that system, then there's other options you have. For example, because it's a proof-of-work system, you could actually create a voting mechanism that includes a voice of the miners and give them some vote based upon their hash rate, in addition to people who have stake. That's something unique to mining systems that proof-of-stake systems don't have. You also could develop reputation metrics in the ecosystem and weight voting that way. And this is something we can discuss through the ECIP process. I'm not 100% in favor of plutocratic systems. I think that there's some evidence they work, like, for example, shareholder votes with big companies. But then there's evidence that it creates moral hazards or short-term thinking. That's not necessarily in the best interest of the ecosystem. So this is something that we're actively looking into on the Cardano side, but there's actually more tools on a mining coin side to create checks and balances and weight voting accordingly. You can also vote in stages, and you can also vote through layers. So stages is where you spread a vote out over multiple votes over a period of time. And then layers are where you delegate your votes to other actors, and then they preserve that voting power for a term, like a representative republic, for example. So all of these mechanics can be discussed in the next phase when we're actually methodically building something out. And because there's funding, we can bring in a lot of domain experts and talk around what would make it fair. And that's why I said I think the system will eventually converge to something very unique to the needs of ETC, because then all these different constituencies are going to start popping up, from various dapp developers to various other people in the system, not just people who hold Ether Classic, but other people. And they'll say, I want a voice too. How do you accommodate my voice with this type of a system? And we can figure out a technical solution for that.
All right. Thank you, Charles. So we have 5 more minutes on schedule. I'm really interested in hearing that if anyone who is for a treasury in one form or another what would they like to see in the Treasury proposal. Now remember, it's only an ECIP proposal, it's a draft and things. So if you have any, feedback on stuff on the voice channel, please, share your opinion.
Yeah, I would just personally add that I've been someone who's been talking about kind of the 51% attack risk that ETC has since basically last year, so when we had our first attacks. And now we have 2 more of them, and I think we're going to have more personally because the underlying situation hasn't changed. And when I look at this Treasury proposal, my first reaction was, this doesn't solve the underlying 51% problem because they're still miners. But, the more I think about it, the more sense it makes, because the biggest issue that we as ETC have is fundamentally a human issue, is that we don't have enough people in the space working on it. We don't have enough kind of eyeballs paying attention and solving these problems. And I think that if the Treasury can bring more people in and make the community more decentralized by getting more players in, I think that that is literally the most core function that we can achieve right now. So I'm extremely in support of it, and actually really happy to see that people are moving forward and coming up with new ideas and, resurrecting this idea that was rejected long before I was here. I never got a chance to either support it or reject it in the past. It was just decided years ago that somehow we don't have a treasury, but I think it's a great idea now.
Thank you, Alex. I just want to ask another question by one of the users. This one, James Woe here. I got a question. ECC, which is the Ethereum Classic Co-op, and ETC Core have contributed to the ETC network for the past several years with real fund, while IOHK left for a long time. Why should IOHK get fund $3 million from miners, not others? Why should we trust IOHK?
Because I was here in the very beginning, James, and I put millions of dollars of my own money in. I understand that you've put money in, and that's why I say we should split it up. But I was here in the beginning. I put my brand and reputation on the line. I took considerable criticism. I was there right when the split happened. And I was on Let's Talk Bitcoin with Andreas and Antonopoulos, taking the hits. I was called a scammer. People accused me of being the DAO hacker. And I showed up.
Let him finish the question. Let him finish the question. We've heard enough from you.
So he's asking, can Charles contribute to ETC network with his personal assets for 1-2 years starting now?
Okay, is that the question? Yeah. I mean, I just answered that question.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Guys, as I said before, I was here in the beginning of Ethereum, in the beginning of Ethereum Classic. Again, I put my own time and money in. I didn't ask for anything until I had a fully working client built with 100% new code. We didn't take it from anyone else. We didn't fork anyone else's code. We brought a lot of great people into the ecosystem, like Grigori Rosu, who formalized the EVM with K, the first formal set of semantics for the EVM. And we brought innovative new ideas to bear that would make Ethereum Classic more secure, more sustainable, and resistant to 51% attacks. The community wanted to move in a different way. What did I do? Did I create a contentious hard fork? No. I said, you know what? Guys, you take it from here. Good luck. I hope that it all works out. Years later, it didn't. And we're here today with 51% attacks, threats of exchange delisting, lack of adoption, and a worse competitive environment than ever before. And then the question is, why don't you go put a few $1 million more of your own money into this? Because the $1.5 million you spent and the years you spent prior aren't good enough. Is that a legitimate question?
It is.
I'm sorry. If you're going to ask respectful questions, I'll be respectful. But if you're going to ask questions of that matter, I really can't be. Guys, this is a question about
Terry, we're going to have to meet you if you can't be respectful. You're being very aggressive right now. Please. Keep it respectful.
I just want to, understood. But Charles, look at it from our point of view. You left a couple of years ago, and now you're back saying, if you pay me $3 million, I'll bring my client back. That's quite a
I'm back telling you to solve the fundamental problem. You guys, it's not about whether I get paid or not. Pick somebody else. Don't even do Mantis. Take the plan and find somebody else then. We believe we bring a lot to the table. If you want somebody else, go do that. But what I'm telling you right now is you need to tell the whole cryptocurrency space that ETC is open for business, and this is the chain you want to build on.
there are $44 billion worth of miners that are going to be unemployed pretty soon, and they're looking for a new home. And you need to go make the case as an ecosystem, guys, come to us. Why do they want to come to you over someone else when they have 500 other options? And what I'm trying to say is show that you're willing to put your money where your mouth is. The chain is willing to subsidize those people who are going to hold the chain up, not just the miners, but the people who build it. And the chain is eventually willing to subsidize the people who are going to build on it because your competitors are willing to do that. EOS with their $1 billion fund, Tezos with their $600 million fund, Algorand with, I think they have over $100 million, go down the line. Developers are businesses. They don't make decisions based just strictly on philosophy. Some do, but most don't. They make it on the bottom line, and they say, is this the best infrastructure to run in? Is this the most reliable and lowest cost infrastructure to run in? And is this infrastructure really going to get me adoption for my business? Because that person is taking a risk. And if they fail, they could lose their livelihood. They could lose their home. They could go get a divorce. Life is bad. So what does it mean? It means they have to not put themselves in a situation where they're both taking the risk of starting a business and building a new idea and the platform that they're building on failing. You just don't want that. So if you guys want someone else to be that third member, then let's go ahead and have that discussion, find someone else. But this is not about enriching IOHK, guys. It has nothing to do with that. You're not going to make a lot of money on this contract. What this is about is saying, I've already been here, I've been down this road before, and I want a guarantee that there's going to be funds on the table so that the ecosystem can innovate, because innovation is expensive. Our competitors got it through ICOs, we didn't. This is the only other option available to us, and we've already tried the volunteerism or patronage model, and it's not gotten anywhere. We spent 5 years down that road. It's not going to result anywhere.
I just want to add on, too, that I think that it's so incredibly rude, the ETC Labs position on this, because basically they are a completely opaque organization. I have no idea how much money they actually want to put into this protocol or not, or how long they can sustain, because the coin price has been dropping like a stone over the past 3 years. And I would much rather, as a dapp developer, there's a transparent source of funding. I know that X thousand ETC is allocated every month towards funding of nodes and funding of clients. That to me is great, and that's transparent. So I think it's a way better improvement than the status quo that we have right now, which is this weird patronage model like that happened with ETC Dev and now with ETC Labs, and I just don't like it myself.
No.
So, look, Charles, I think a lot of what you say about the roadmap and the need to attract people to ETC is exactly right. And I think your critique of the experiment is spot on. And your logic about needing to fund innovation, I couldn't agree more. Where we diverge is, I think that the Treasury model as proposed does more damage to good. I think we're literally stealing from Peter to pay ourselves. I don't see how that grows the chain.
Well, everybody's taxed. And as I said, we can disagree without being disagreeable and then propose an alternative. We've tried it with the no funding approach for all these years, and we have to honestly ask, why has that not worked? Why have we not gotten the adoption? And if there's an alternative approach to do that, then this was a valuable conversation. Because if it ends up working, what does that ultimately mean? It means that Ethereum Classic is successful, right? If it doesn't work, well, then we have to go back to the drawing board and have the courage to innovate. But we don't have unlimited time. We had the luxury of time in 2017 to go try it differently. But now in 2020, this is just going to get worse and worse, and you're going to keep getting pushed further and further down the chain. More delistings are going to happen, and eventually you'll wake up and it'll be number 300 or number 400, and there'll be a small group of fanatics who say, no, one day it'll all be great, just like NXT has or others have. So I don't want that to happen. I don't think anyone here wants that to happen. That's the unifying cause. It's why you guys take time out of your schedule to show up for a call like this. No one's being paid to show up for this call because we all really care about this project. We've all invested heavily in this project today or yesterday. And I'm just trying to propose something that I feel is best. Now, if you feel that it's stealing from Peter to pay Paul, well, we're all being stolen from, let's be clear about that, every day with inflation. And Satoshi came up with that model, and nobody seems to question it. And I'm just saying, if you're going to build a government, don't just fund one department. You have to fund more than one department. Fund all the departments necessary for you to actually provide value to the government. And if there's a different way of doing it, do it, or stick with the past, and maybe you'll find a way out of it. As I said before, regardless of what happens, we'll write an ECIP for both the Treasury and the ECIP for a checkpointing system. If you guys want to implement that system, we'll be there to help you guys do that. And we wish you well. And I really hope you can find an alternative to get out of these. If you want to pursue the Treasury, we're here. And you can do it with IO Global. You can do it without us and find someone else. That's fine too. But I want to wake up 3 years from now and see Ethereum Classic still around and still valuable and be a successful project. Whether I'm part of it or not, that has no bearing on that desire. I want this project to succeed.
So in the interest of time, we're 6-minute overtime. We included that there might be a 30-minute overtime. So, we still have, we can still go overtime. So I need to field the question from one of our users. Why, in relation to the conversation, the back and forth between Terry and Charles, he asked, why should we trust ETCLand? Didn't you guys organize a GitHub takeover, James? So maybe Terry can respond back to that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, you can trust us, not trust us. Everybody has their reasons. And it's not a question of trust, really. We're going to contribute to ETC regardless of whether people trust us or not, and try to improve the community and try to improve the technology. We welcome other people to do that. Charles, we think you have enormous expertise and strengths to bring to Ethereum Classic. And we really hope you can do that. We just don't think the Treasury is the right mechanism for it.
I'm just trying to read more questions. Let me see. Charles, there's a question by the user Zane. He asked, what should we look for an accurate take on what this Treasury proposal is? You mentioned that the 2017 white paper is stale. If so, what changed?
We'll write an ECIP, and that will be the reference point. And then we actually would love for that to be crowdsourced and for the core development teams to modify it, add to it, and for us to converge to something that's reasonable. My hope is that the on-chain changes are very mild, so just a diversion of funds from 100% going to the miner to, let's say, some percentage to the miner, some percentage to the contract. And then the actual complexity lives in a Solidity smart contract, because that's the most modifiable and easiest to access and the least dramatic change. And then we just have to argue about checks and balances and how that's going to work. So it'll take us a little while to write the ECIP, probably a week or more. And then that's just a preliminary, and then there'll be a debate around it. And my hope is to converge within a month or two to a final design. It'll take 3 months for Mantis to be ready. In the interim, there's another ECIP, as I mentioned, of how do we resolve the 51% attacks today. We can demonstrate a resolution to that much faster because we already have a resolution to that implemented on Mantis for an unrelated project. So it's just a matter of extracting that and doing a demo and then showing people how to implement this. And actually the checkpointing side is fairly modular, so it probably can plug into Geth and other clients as well, and that code can be reused. So my hope is we can get that ECIP pushed through very quickly so that puts out the immediate fire. And then we can be a little bit more systematic about this proto contract if there's enough community support for it. Hopefully get it before the end of the year, worst case scenario next year. But again, it's not my goal to railroad something through. It's my goal to send a message to the cryptocurrency space that ETC is open for business. And it's the chain you need to build on. And I think this is the most dramatic, clear-cut message we can send. And in very short order, it will provoke a conversation that will force the ecosystem to evolve rapidly and develop a very strong competitive roadmap that is equivalent in its draw to ETH2, and really make the case for a lot of dapp developers and token issuers to come over to ETC and miners to come over to ETC.
Thank you, Charles. By the way, just to inform you, next week on Thursday, August 20th, we are going to have a call about proposals for, what to do about the 51% attacks. So, we would hope that IOHK and the engineers can come, talk about their, checkpointing system as one potential solution by next week.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And actually, we'll see if we can get a demo set up before that time period. We'll do like a YouTube video or something showing a synthetic 51% attack and a recovery, because we already tested that, as I mentioned, for a prior product. We just have to pull it out.
Thank you. So Bob said he wanted to say something as well. Bob.
You there, Bob?
Bob.
I think he's back on the maple syrup.
Let me ask Allison. Let me see. Yeah.
Hey guys.
Hey Bob.
Hey. Sorry, I was just I just couldn't unmute myself.
No problem.
So yeah, I just wanted to express my support for a migration to a treasury model. Really, for the simple reason that that growing the ETC ecosystem, having getting more interest, getting more miners, I think is ultimately the root solution to a lot of problems that we have. I think the alternative really likely sees us just continuing where we are or slow degradation. And I think now with having suffered 351% attacks, it's pretty clear to me that we need to be a lot more innovative than we have been, and we need to have a clear separation in roadmap from Ethereum. So much the same as various other people have been saying, that I just don't see other external funding likely to appear right now. So this intrinsic funding model, to my mind, is something which can give the whole ecosystem a lot of stability, and there we are.
Totally agree.
All right. Any more questions? All right. Let me see in chat.
I think one of the main questions that I'm seeing pop up is, assume we take a block reward for the community fund or for the treasury. What happens when the price increases and that reward is greater than the initial expectations? How has that changed?
Well, there's two ways you can look at it. One, you have higher expectations of your core developers, or two, you reduce the percentage inflation. So one of the beauties of having a shutoff valve is that it doesn't have to be an absolute shutoff valve. It can be partial. So you could start with an initial percentage of inflation, X, and then you could reduce it to half X or to a quarter X. You put those mechanics inside the clients themselves, and people review it with some degree of regularity. But this, in essence, gives you a kind of a call to action to replace the proto contract with a more sophisticated system for just that reason. Because these are examples of edge cases that will just keep coming up. Whenever you build something, there's always but what about this? But what about this thing that happens, right? So then you say, well, wait, I need to build a better system. And so at some point, you get to a point where the initial system just can't satisfy that what about this demand. So what you do is you get it started, you prime it for 6 months or so, you get a sufficient level of progress, and then you go to the drawing board from first principles and you build a system that's bespoke, that deals with most of these edge cases, or it can self-evolve to deal with edge cases that come up along the way.
All right. Steph, you have a question?
Thursday. I appreciate your thoughts, Charles. I also resonate with a lot of the things that you say. As far as, I actually want to piggyback on what Alex said much earlier on about people opting out of a treasury or some type of other mechanisms for that. Because in my view, if a treasury is able to, because I'm from the ETC Lab side, if we were the beneficiaries of treasury, like, wow, yeah, you can do some cool stuff with that. What I feel really uncomfortable with is, as my personal values, obviously who likes taxes, and as someone who was involved in mining too, I also feel, as some of our major pools said, we cannot support this block reward, or maybe that's a negotiable variable in the treasury. But if our existing miners, who thankfully, like, we have some pools that are really resilient and keeping ETC afloat right now, if they were like, oh hey, yes, we'd love to contribute, I'd feel a lot more comfortable with that. But as far as what Alex said about more mechanisms for like a burn address or something, that's something that I'd personally feel is a nice approach. Or anything, when you say something about government, yeah, you have government, and we all do our taxes with government, but of course we have avenues of reducing our amount of taxes, and that's something that I would like to see in any kind of government system, or any type of taxation that goes to anything.
Right, and that's pretty simple to do. If you have a partial cutoff valve, you can reduce the overall amount of inflation that goes to the treasury contract versus the miner. Second, for opt out, we right now cannot opt out of mining. So everybody pays that tax. There's no real good way to reduce it, and you can't opt out of it because it's a necessary feature. And I'm trying to make the argument that development is equivalent to mining in terms of it being necessary. You can't really get anywhere unless you have well-supported clients, and you can't really evolve unless they exist. So the system should view them as equals in that respect, or at least in the same spectrum, and both deserve a subsidy. How much? Well, I mean, that depends on how much security do you want and how much innovation do you want. And you have to start balancing these things. And they're hard. It's just like in any government. How much healthcare do you want? How much education do you want? How much defense do you want? What proportions should be allocated between these things? And some people think, one should be very small and others should be very high. And the diversity of ideas eventually can converge to a budget. And as cryptocurrencies become more meaningful, they go from what Bitcoin is, which is just a push settlement system, to what Ethereum intends to be, which is this world computer that does lots of cool stuff, from voting to DeFi and so forth. You need to diversify a bit the governance layer of the system above and beyond just paying for one actor to be around. You have to go beyond that, or else the system can't sustain itself.
Thank you, Charles. Another question by Hudson, the one and only Hudson from Ethereum, one of my favorite people.
Hey.
Hello.
So the question is, has the Zcash style major grants committee structure been explored at all by those proposing the Treasury?
Well, I'm kind of proposing a proto Zcash, right? Yeah, we did look heavily at Zcash's model when we were doing due diligence for Cardano. There's what you want to get away from is decision by committee and centralized decision making wherever possible. And so, you say start with something that most people can agree with, that, people who've put in millions of dollars and years of work should probably be given the resources to keep doing that. And the work is clearly universally beneficial to everybody, because you simply cannot use Ethereum Classic without this infrastructure. So it's a good idea for that to be performant and secure and awesome. But then you get into kind of the next level stuff, which is, what about the constellation of all the other things that you need for this ecosystem to be useful and great? For example, in the Ethereum ecosystem, you guys phenomenal work subsidizing lots of cool projects, like Vitalik invested in Starkware, for example, and that's been an incredibly fruitful investment. So there, you can have a custodian like Ethereum Foundation is, or others are, or you can have a benefactor company like Consensus, or you can have a treasury model or something like that. And you can either do it staged, where it goes to a group of people to manage it, like a VC or a grant committee, and then they give it out, kind of like Horizons 2020 in Europe, or you can do it through a ballot system like Dash does it, or other people do it. I prefer a ballot system because it feels more fair. It avoids cults of personality. It avoids centralized decision making. It avoids having to be liked by people on the committee. You're making a direct appeal to the community instead of a small governing board. Unfortunately, the mechanics you have to put in to actually pull it off in practice are really hard, and they require a lot of deep thought, which is why Vitalik has historically been very skeptical about a system like that, and for good reason. And we're right now actually going through those mechanics as an experiment with the Cardano ecosystem. There's enormous amount of work we're putting into figuring out if this is going to work or not. And it's going to take 6 months or greater for us to go through all the experiments we want before we feel comfortable with a 1.0 system there. So the advantage ETC has is they don't actually have to make a decision today. What I'm saying is there's clearly a need to create some diversity and a clear roadmap to compete. So let's go do that. Let's get that started with enough checks and balances that everybody's okay for the next 6 months. Then let's look at the totality of things and decide where on the spectrum we want to live. And if we can't figure it out, well, okay, at least we got some people funded for a while to get the ecosystem through a hump and shut off the treasury contract. So you kind of got to try before you buy. And you'll be able to see the outcome of all the experiments we've done with Voltaire. You'll be able to see 6 more months of data from the Tezos chain. And you'll be able to see more successes and failures from Zcash and other ecosystems. And eventually, I think we can figure out what we want to do. But we can do it in a very systematic way, a very balanced way, with a diversity of opinions that are independent from each other, and so they can keep each other in checks and balances. I think it's a very reasonable approach.
Thanks for answering.
Good to see you here.
Hey, so one question by the user W1G0. Can Treasury system be assigned to bounties on Gitcoin?
Yeah, it's actually another interesting thing is you could divert funds to an existing system that's already set up. And the answer is, yeah, you could technically do something like that. This is an example of a partnership that could be made. And we could figure out a way to put a collection of the treasury funds into Gitcoin and use that as the bounty system while we're building our own, or we just choose to permanently leave that. And that could be a fourth pipe. And that's another example of the creative process. While we're writing the ECIP, these types of ideas can leak in, and partnerships can come in, and it makes it ultimately a much stronger idea.
Thank you. So guys, we have 7 more minutes, and we really need to be wrapping this up. So, like from looking at the question and looking at all the comments inside, it seemed there's like a split over half saying no, half saying yes. So normally when somebody proposes an ECIP and it's in a draft stage, that it happens before any consensus can be gathered and stuff. So I think, like, my personal opinion is, at the very least, to make a proposal for an ECIP for a draft stage is really warranted right now, at least to see what the proposal might look like, because a lot of people might be curious about it as well. So yeah, 7 more minutes. Let's see if we have any more questions or any final statements or something.
I just wanted to say, I think Charles said this a few years ago, long-term crypto requires continuous maintenance of protocol and algorithm, which requires appropriate funding. Lack of funding will leave operations frozen. A deficient issue resolution routine. Occasional funding with weakly managed voluntary contributions may result in security vulnerabilities and system instability. Thus, stable funding is a key component of a long-term outlook.
Yeah, so it's already 24 minutes overtime. Anyone has any final statement? Because we need to close it off. People can still ask questions in the Treasury channel that we created, and we'll collect them more, and people can answer them offline and stuff. But we're recording this talk and we're transcribing it, and we're already over time, so we need to wrap this up. So any closing statement from Charles?
Well, I'd just like to thank everybody for the opportunity and wish everybody well. I know that I occasionally have a reputation for controversy, and that's okay. Everybody who wants to change things tends to accrue that over time. But at the end of the day, I I believe that no matter what happens, that if good people come together and they work really hard and think deeply about the root problems, that they can eventually solve it. And I hope if we accomplish anything out of this conversation, we come up with a long-term resolution to the root cause of these 51% attacks. And as I said before, I really want to see ETC succeed. We'll do our best to try to push the marketplace of ideas in a certain direction. And I'd love for everybody to have a voice and speak up and participate, regardless if they're within or outside of the ecosystem. And if they think they can add some value, or they think there's a moral hazard or a problem that needs to be resolved for this to be viable, please do say something and get it done. And if you disagree, that's fine, but please issue an alternative approach. That don't just disagree and say we need more of the same. Then kind of explain how are we going to get out of this situation of constant decline or stagnation. Where do we go? Final point, protocols are complicated. The Ethereum community is learning this with S2, and they're doing a great job navigating that complexity, but it took them years and a hell of a lot of time and money and effort to build up the capabilities to navigate that complexity. And so when we look to the future and we say, how do we get to a system that can service millions to billions of users? Because let's be honest, Ethereum can't, and thus Ethereum Classic can't. We need more complicated protocols. More complicated protocols means more can go wrong. We saw this with Zcash, where they had a bug that if people took advantage of it, they could counterfeit coins, and you wouldn't even know that they did it. That's a big problem. It's the worst attack in the history of cryptocurrencies in a certain respect. So similarly, when you start talking about more complex consensus protocols or better smart contracting, the complexity required to service that means that you have to have more specialized talent and you have to have more people. So your cost to service that complexity goes up. So if you don't like a treasury, fine, but then please do explain how are we going to field a team that has the resources necessary to meet the challenges of the future, because our competitors certainly do have those resources.
Thank you very much, Charles, and thank you for taking the time to come here, to explain your point of view. I understand it's been a controversial topic, but it's, really brave that, to face the ETC community with a bold proposal. I want to thank everyone for coming here and asking questions. I think for the next step, we'll be looking forward to initial draft from IOHK into the ECIP process as a draft. If you guys have any feedback about the 51% attack and potential solution, we do have a call, as a reminder, next week, Thursday at 12 p.m. UTC on August 20th. So thank you, everybody, and have a good day. All the recordings, everything is transcribed, will be uploaded later today. And we look forward to taking this offline and continue the discussion. Take care.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.